light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I'm Sister Who. Today I wanted to offer some thoughts and reflections on the ways that we sometimes trivialize, or the ways we think about each other's life, and how we too often forget that sometimes we are somebody else's somebody else. That when someone says, it always happens to someone else. Sometimes we are somebody else's somebody else. The particular point that I want to address today in response to that, though, is the extent to which we want everyone to be there. The extent to which we remember that every person is a person. There's something called objectification, which may be a very academic term, I'm not sure, but it basically means looking at people and treating them as if they were objects. And it happens in a million different ways in relationships of all sorts. In every case, it's a little bit problematic and sometimes a lot problematic, but at least a little bit. Because when we see someone as an object, something to satisfy our needs, something to fill a certain role, but we don't see them as a real person, it's like we've taken all the multidimensionality of that person and shrunk it down to one little facet. The cashier at the supermarket is no more than a cashier. Has no family, has no history, has nothing other than the functionality of punching numbers and taking money and giving change to get your purchases, to get your shopping done, to get you out of the store. In a sense, that cashiers become nothing but an object. And when everything flows smoothly, well, that was a good object. And when something goes wrong, the computer doesn't work right, the person makes a mistake or misunderstands something that you said, or maybe they're in a bad mood because the customer right before you was just a horribly grumpy person. Suddenly that cashier becomes an object, and specifically an adversarial object, something by which to be frustrated, something to lash out at defensively, instead of a person to whom to reach out in a compassionate way. That when somebody is grumpy or bitter about something, to offer a smile instead, not because that's the logical response to their hostile action, but because that's a reflection of your intention to move things in a more positive direction. Where this sometimes gets taken to, and the general attitude behind this of, is a person an object or a person? It seems all too common, I guess, in American society, when somebody has a disagreement, to say, I'm going to kill you, or in traffic, somebody is driving recklessly, or creates a difficult situation, or somebody takes a parking spot that you were hoping to get when you get to a parking lot somewhere. And the immediate response is anger and wanting to devalue or somehow erase that person so that you can have what you wanted. The ability to, when you want a parking spot in a parking lot, to drive in, and somebody, just as you're about to pull into a parking spot, somebody else swerves in ahead of you, and to have your little science fiction ray gun and zap them and have them just totally disappear. And a lot of people have joked about that as if it would be, got you, and I got my parking spot. In a real sense, though, if that had really happened, we have just eliminated somebody's family member. there is a family someplace who will be sitting down to supper that night perhaps, and there will be an empty place at the table because somebody didn't come home. We have just created, potentially, for sake of this hypothetical metaphor, we've perhaps just created an economic disaster. If that person was the breadwinner for the family, so to speak, the one whose income from employment provided the money for taxes and for electric bills and phone bills and clothing and everything that the family needs, and suddenly that family has no income, no economic resources because that person was eliminated for stealing a parking spot. And some people might find this very amusing, and of course it's implausible because we don't really have that sort of ray gun to just zap everybody who we'd like to eliminate because they're frustrating to us. But what I'm inviting in this episode is to stop for a moment and look in the mirror and consider the impulse to want to eliminate any other person at all, instead of seeing that interaction as a chance to make a new friend, get to know someone, accept a different outcome than what you anticipated. That maybe there's some reason you weren't supposed to be in that parking spot. Maybe there's another parking spot that's just as good, or maybe it's about you learning to share the world with all these other people. To find something good in it, not in a way that makes you resent the situation, but in a way that is empowering and inspiring. To choose to use parking further away as a reminder to be thankful for having the ability to walk that far, because some people don't. And I'm not saying to bludgeon yourself into a Pollyanna kind of, be happy about everything sort of box. I'm simply saying the opportunity is there to choose a collaborative and mutually empowering relationship with all of humanity around you, instead of choosing an adversarial one. But it seems to me that so many people have gotten so accustomed to joking about pulling out an invisible ray gun and shooting the person who upset them or frustrated them or who irritated them in whatever way. At some point, shouldn't we stop and look in the mirror and say, why do I need the world to be perfect? Am I such a weak, incompetent person that I have to have a perfect world because I just can't deal with anything? How pathetic. The thing I think, even for people with disabilities, or maybe some would say especially for people with disabilities, that is so amazing is our adaptability and our ingenuity. That in all these sorts of different situations, we have come up with ways to surmount amazing challenges. People with all sorts of disabilities, people who are blind, people who were paraplegic, finding ways to climb mountains. I have a friend who's paraplegic, who's a rancher. I have another friend who's been blind since birth, who is a university professor. The challenges that we have taken on and surmounted, not because it was easy, not because the answer was obvious, but because these individuals wanted to accomplish that, and they refused to give up until they found a way. Kind of like the old saying, where there's a will, there's a way. That if we don't give up, and if we keep trying, and if we study something and ask enough questions to figure out what is going on here, and what is the need, and if someone is driving recklessly in traffic, well, why are they doing that? And who is this person? What's their story? What's their context? What is it that they feel is so important that would be worth that kind of risk? And to the extent that we increase our understanding, it seems to me that the desire to simply shoot them and eliminate them begins to fade, because to the extent that we understand and know the name and know the history of the other person, we don't want them eliminated. We just want more harmonious ways of living. people living together seek harmony. Objects treating each other as objects compete for space. Obviously, we can be people if we want, and we can treat others as people also. I even treat my dogs as people. I respect their wants, their needs, their wishes. I don't treat them as objects that can be disposed, that I can just throw away whenever it's inconvenient to have them. If my dog lives to be 10 instead of dying at age 5, the sad thing about having dogs is that I expect to outlive them. That human lives are generally much longer than the life a dog has. So I see the puppy when he's 8 weeks old, and I choose to be there when he's 15, 17, whatever it is, and has to be euthanized because his body's breaking down and there's just no quality of life anymore. And there's the kidneys are failing, the lungs are failing, all sorts of different things. And accepting the grief at the end as simply a necessary part of the overall picture, instead of raising the puppy, enjoying the puppy, having the good healthy dog, but the minute he has the first health crisis of any sort, at that point, disposing of him, because I don't want to deal with the difficulties. Relationships of love, in my opinion, don't do that. The fact that I've had each of my dogs for all these happy moments of going hiking together and playing together, and all the times they gave me a kiss and welcomed me home, just because they were happy to see me, even if I'd been very irritated with them earlier in the day. They're still totally thrilled to see me and want to be with me. To live in the context of such joy and unconditional love, to me, creates a responsibility to return at least enough of that love that I will provide a safe home and food, and whatever I can for their needs to the last possible moment, and I won't abandon them just because it's no longer fun. In serious life relationships, be it life partners or marriage or even familiar relationships, the thing that makes the relationship real is not all the fun times, not all the convenient, comfortable, enjoyable times. Those are great, but what confirms the relationship is when it's not convenient, comfortable, or even pleasant. And you choose to be there because of the value you have assigned to that multidimensional person, not as an object, but as a multidimensional person who, with a life experience, with a contribution that has been made to your life, and who has also welcomed your contribution in their life. That there's something about being needed and appreciated and validated that tells us our existence is not meaningless. That when we are in a hurry and see an open parking spot and quickly swerve into it before looking around to see if anybody else was about to do the same, and then get out of our car and say, "Oh, did you want that spot? Well, I can move," or I imagine for many people it wouldn't be, "Oh, I can move." It would be, pretend you don't see them and walk to the store as quickly as possible, and leaving the other person who was looking forward to parking there, to deal with their resentment and to deal with having been treated as an object and as a competitor instead of as a whole person. Love is so much better to instead say, "Oh, was that? I'm sorry. I really didn't mean to do that. Here, let me move, and you can." No, and they may at that point say, "No, it's fine," or whatever, and you may have just made a new friend. But the point is, you treat them as a person instead of as an object, and it's not about just eliminating everybody who's inconvenient for you, but understanding that those are the people that make the world that supports your own life experience. The point I keep coming back to, and I just really want to drive this home, I guess, is that it's seeing people as people and seeing things we love as being more than objects, more than single-dimensional entities that are describable in a few words. Growing up in a rural area, from time to time, there would be people who no longer wanted their cats and dogs, and they would come out into the country, and somewhere along the road near a farm or something, they would simply open the car door and throw the animal out and drive away as quickly as they could, essentially abandoning the animal to whatever fate. And it was heart-wrenching to see that, because of course the animal who loves this family would be running as hard as it could to try to catch up with the car and be totally bewildered at being left behind. In a similar sort of way, I guess, it's easy to be presumptuous and driven when you're the one who's in a hurry and something didn't go right and you're trying to make up for lost time, you're swerving in and out, cutting people off, creating dangerous traffic situations, and then suddenly you get a flat tire. And doggone it, nobody will stop and help you. It makes so much more sense to be respectful of each other, to demonstrate love in all the little ways to each other. And when that becomes the general paradigm, instead of eliminating whoever's inconvenient, then having a flat tire, suffering a breakdown along the road, running into difficulty is not the crisis it could be, because you live in a world that where people care about each other. Obviously, there are several million cynics in the world who will insist that I'm being unrealistic at the moment and that we don't live in that kind of world. But from some reading I did of Gandhi also, he said that basically the world is fundamentally good, because every time there's a disaster or all the politicians and tyrants get out of the way, people start working together to create society all over again. It is there within each of us, but I'm very concerned that the extent to which others treat us as objects and the extent to which we treat others as objects puts layers of mud and darkness on top of all the beautiful qualities we have inside. And we joke about, well, just shoot it. Well, I'm going to kill you. Well, just maybe that's the sort of comedy that needs to be stopped. Maybe we need to stop saying, I'm going to kill you, when we have no mortal intention against the person. Maybe we need to stop joking about it as if it were a light thing, and understand that even the person who is frustrated, irritated, annoyed, aggravated, feeling put on, feeling overwhelmed by challenges for which they do not personally have the resources, that in finding a way to continue to see them as a person instead of as an object to be removed from your path, and in allowing them to feel your love, and even allowing that initially it will be very disorienting to them, because people don't usually treat them that way. In one sense, it kind of reminds me of that goofy bumper sticker I saw a while back. Keep smiling, people will wonder what you've been up to. If what we've been up to is playing the part of somebody's guardian angel without them knowing it, if we've been paying it forward, if we've been holding our tongue instead of threatening, idle threat maybe, but nevertheless verbally threatening violence against another person. I ought to just smack you. Really? Is it that serious? maybe what we ought to do is say, how can I help? Maybe what we ought to do is say, I'll take care of this. You just sit down and catch your breath for a moment. I can see this is a very difficult moment for you. I'll handle this for you. Next time you can take care of me, but for now I'll handle this for you. It's reaching out to each other in love and being there for each other in love that offers the possibility of beginning to turn back the tide of cynicism, that begins to make the cynic the unusual one, the one who says, oh, people don't help people, when the majority of people say, oh, yes, we do, instead of allowing the cynic to be in the majority. We have the freedom to make that choice. We have the ability. It's an inherent part of being human, that we can choose to answer bad with good. I'm reminded of the time when some of us who were aware of this basic principle, when we were in college, when someone was having an argument and someone said something adversarial, and the other person responded, well, I love you too. And the first person said, well, that's not fair. How are we supposed to argue with that? And of course, that was the whole point, to say that misunderstandings happen, accidents happen, mistakes happen, sometimes words are said too hastily. And in those moments, we can choose forgiveness. We can choose understanding. We can choose love instead of adversity. We can choose to be supportive instead of abrasive. We can choose to own our part of the misunderstanding, even while acknowledging that what the person said was very inflammatory. Without calling them a bad person, to say, well, that sounded very hostile. Did you mean it that way? Or what exactly did you mean by that? Or what response are you looking for? There was one occasion where someone felt the need to come in and into a particular meeting I went to, and to give me this whole big rundown, blaming me for their emotional experience of a situation that I had found totally confusing, and I didn't understand what was going on or how to answer it. And I just said, so how does this, and the fact that I'd questioned the progression of that conversation when the person thought they had been so abundantly clear was so adversarial to them that instead of looking at how they had not been clear, they instead came and attacked me for being hostile and making them feel bad. And I just listened patiently because I understood that I hadn't made them feel anything. I simply offered a response that reflected where I was at. But it wasn't the response for which she was hoping, and consequently she felt hurt, but what she was hurt by was the fact that we didn't understand each other. It wasn't that anyone did anything wrong, but it was that there was a lack of understanding. It was something outside of both of us. She blamed me, however, went through and then said, so what's your response? And I said, well, what response do you want? Because to me it was about as legitimate as if she had accused me of having green hair and having emigrated from Mars. It's like, okay, but nothing she said was true. I respect that she believes it, but I know it wasn't true, so I really didn't know what to say. So until I knew what to say, I wasn't going to throw any more confusion on the table. Nor was I going to talk down to her, nor was I going to blame her for escalating the situation when I really didn't know what I wanted to know was what would move the conversation in a positive direction. I wanted to know how to answer the negative with something positive. I wanted to know how to warm things up again instead of putting this icy wall between us. And in the moment I didn't know, and so I chose to pause in quietness and think about it and try to figure out which way to go from there. And so she said, so what's your response? I said, well, what response do you want? Well, she didn't know either, and so at that point she turned around and walked away. But and I wish I could have said something that would have been more curative for her. But I don't have all the answers. I'm another person finding my way through life. And I think really it's only by not walking away and by seeing the humanity of the other person that we begin to find the answers that will allow us to become true family instead of driving down the highway wanting to eliminate everyone in our path. I hope I've given you some good things to think about throughout this last half hour. Thank you very much for watching.